The alarm clock's gentle chime echoed through the private quarters at Windsor Castle at precisely 5:30 a.m. Kate Middleton stirred first, her eyes opening to the soft morning light filtering through the heavy curtains. Today was not just any day, it was the day that would change everything. The coronation of King Charles III was about to begin, and she and William would play a central role in this historic moment. William was already awake, staring at the ornate ceiling above their bed. His mind raced with the weight of what lay ahead. As the Prince of Wales, he would be expected to carry himself with the dignity befitting his new title, while also supporting his father through one of the most important days of his life. The responsibility felt enormous yet familiar. He had been preparing for moments like this his entire life. Kate quietly slipped from the bed and moved to the window. Outside, she could see the early morning preparations already underway. Security personnel moved like shadows across the grounds, their earpieces crackling with constant communication. Florists were making final adjustments to the elaborate displays that would line the processional route. Even at this early hour, dedicated royal watchers had already begun gathering along the streets, their camping chairs and Union Jack flags creating a colorful patchwork along the sidewalks. The couple's 3 children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, were still sleeping peacefully in their rooms down the hall. Kate felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness about how they would handle the day's events. George, as second in line to the throne, would have particularly important duties to perform. Charlotte and Louis, though younger, would also be in the spotlight more than ever before. William joined Kate at the window, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the world wake up to this monumental day. Neither needed to speak about the magnitude of what was happening. They had discussed it endlessly in the weeks leading up to today, going over every detail of protocol, timing, and expectations. The couple's personal assistant knocked softly on the door, reminding them that breakfast would be served in 30 minutes. Their schedule was precisely planned down to the minute. Every movement, every appearance, every gesture had been choreographed and rehearsed. Yet despite all the preparation, there was an electricity in the air that couldn't be contained or controlled. Kate began her morning routine, selecting the jewelry that would complement her carefully chosen outfit. Each piece had been selected not just for its beauty, but for its historical significance and symbolic meaning. The earrings had belonged to Diana, William's mother, adding a deeply personal touch to the formal proceedings. The necklace was a gift from the Queen, passed down through generations of royal women. William reviewed his speech notes one final time, though he had already memorized every word. As he would be required to pledge his loyalty to his father as the new king, his words needed to be perfect. The speech had been written and rewritten multiple times, with input from constitutional experts, historians, and family members. Every phrase had been carefully crafted to honor tradition, while reflecting the modern monarchy's values. The morning news was already filled with coverage of the day's events. Television crews from around the world had been setting up for days, their cameras positioned at strategic locations throughout London. Royal commentators analyzed every detail, from the weather forecast to the guest list, speculating about what surprises the day might bring. Security briefings had been ongoing for months. The level of protection required for an event of this magnitude was unprecedented. Every route had been swept and cleared multiple times. Every guest had been thoroughly vetted. Every contingency had been planned for. The security operation involved thousands of personnel from multiple agencies, all working together to ensure the day proceeded without incident. Kate and William's relationship had evolved significantly since their wedding day over a decade earlier. They had grown from a young couple in love to seasoned members of the royal family, comfortable in their roles and confident in their partnership. Today would test that partnership in new ways, as they navigated not just their own emotions and responsibilities, but also helped their children through their first major royal ceremony. The breakfast table was set with the finest china, but neither Kate nor William had much appetite. The nervous energy was too strong. They sipped their tea and picked at their food, their minds already racing ahead to the cathedral, the crowds, and the cameras that would capture every moment for history. Outside their window, London was fully awakening. The streets that would soon be filled with pageantry were busy with final preparations. Street cleaners made sure every surface was spotless. Sound technicians tested their equipment one last time. The city itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the moment when the procession would begin and history would unfold before the watching world. As they finished their breakfast, Kate and William exchanged a look that spoke volumes. They were ready. Whatever challenges the day might bring, they would face them together, with dignity, grace, and the unwavering support they had always provided each other. The coronation was about to begin, and they were prepared to play their part in this historic moment that would be remembered for generations to come. The next 2 hours transformed the quiet castle into a bustling center of activity. Kate's dressing room had been converted into what resembled a high-end salon, complete with professional lighting, mirrors, and every beauty product imaginable. Her hairstylist, who had been working with the royal family for years, arrived with an assistant and immediately began setting up their equipment. William's preparation was more straightforward, but no less important. His military uniform had been pressed to perfection, every medal and ribbon positioned exactly according to protocol. His valet carefully inspected each detail, ensuring that not a single thread was out of place. The uniform represented not just his personal achievements, but his role as a future king and current Prince of Wales. Kate sat patiently as her hair was styled into an elegant updo that would support her hat throughout the long ceremony. The process took nearly an hour, with each section carefully arranged and secured. Her makeup was applied with precision, creating a look that would photograph beautifully under the cathedral's lighting while remaining natural and appropriate for the solemn occasion. The children were being prepared in their own rooms by a team of nannies and assistants. George, at 10 years old, was old enough to understand the importance of the day, but still young enough to be excited rather than nervous. His miniature formal wear had been tailored to perfection, making him look like a small version of his father. Charlotte, 8, was thrilled with her dress and had been practicing her curtsy for weeks. 6-year-old Louis was the wild card, charming and unpredictable, but hopefully well-behaved enough to get through the ceremony without incident. Kate's dress hung on a special padded hanger, protected by a cloth cover. When the time came to put it on, it would be done with the reverence reserved for a piece of art. The designer had worked for months to create something that honored royal tradition while reflecting Kate's personal style. Every stitch had been carefully placed, every detail considered and reconsidered. William reviewed the day's schedule one more time with his private secretary. The timing was crucial. They needed to arrive at Westminster Abbey at precisely the right moment, not too early to disrupt other arrivals, but not so late as to appear rushed or disrespectful. The journey from Windsor to London had been timed and tested multiple times to account for traffic, crowds, and any unexpected delays. The communication between various royal households was constant. Coordination was essential to ensure that everyone arrived in the correct order and that the ceremony proceeded smoothly. Phone calls and messages flew back and forth between Windsor, Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, and Westminster Abbey, with updates on preparations, arrivals, and any last-minute changes. Kate's personal protection officer conducted a final security briefing, reviewing the routes, exits, and emergency procedures. Even though the Abbey would be filled with invited guests, security remained the top priority. The officer had been working with Kate for years and knew her preferences and concerns, but today required extra vigilance due to the unprecedented level of media attention and public interest. The jewelry selection process was particularly meaningful. Kate chose pieces that would honor both her new role and the women who had worn them before her. Each item told a story of royal history and family tradition. The weight of the jewelry was nothing compared to the weight of the responsibility it represented. William's final preparation involved a private moment with his father's equerry, who briefed him on any last-minute changes to the ceremony. The coronation had been planned for months, but royal events were always subject to small adjustments up until the very last moment. William needed to be prepared for anything while maintaining his composure throughout. The media attention was unlike anything they had experienced before. Cameras with telephoto lenses were positioned at every possible vantage point, hoping to capture candid moments of the royal family's preparation. Social media was already buzzing with speculation about what Kate would wear, how the children would behave, and what surprises the ceremony might hold. Kate took a few quiet minutes to herself, standing alone in her dressing room and taking deep breaths. The magnitude of the day was not lost on her. She was about to witness her father-in-law become king, see her husband take another step toward his own future reign, and watch her children participate in a ceremony that would be studied by historians for decades to come. The final touches were applied with meticulous care. Kate's hat was positioned at exactly the right angle, secured with pins that would keep it in place throughout the long ceremony. William's uniform was given one last inspection, ensuring that every detail met the exacting standards expected for such an occasion. The children were brought to their parents for a final check. They looked adorable and appropriately formal, their excitement barely contained. George stood tall and proud, understanding the importance of his role. Charlotte beamed with joy, thrilled to be part of such a grand occasion. Louis bounced on, his toes with energy that would hopefully be channeled into good behavior during the ceremony. As they prepared to leave Windsor Castle, Kate and William took a moment to look at themselves and their family in the mirror. They were ready. The months of preparation, the fittings, the rehearsals, the briefings, everything had led to this moment. In just a few hours, they would be part of history, playing their roles in a ceremony that would crown a new king and mark the beginning of a new era for the British monarchy. The moment had arrived. Kate adjusted her dress one final time as she stepped carefully into the waiting car, her heels clicking softly on the polished stone steps of Windsor Castle. William was already seated, his military uniform immaculate, his expression focused yet calm. The children followed, George helping Charlotte with her dress while Louis fidgeted with excitement, his small hands unable to stay still. The motorcade was impressive, a carefully orchestrated procession of vehicles that had been arranged according to strict protocol. Police motorcycles led the way, their riders in pristine uniforms, followed by security vehicles with darkened windows. The royal car carrying the Wales family was positioned in the center, surrounded by additional protection vehicles. Every detail had been planned and rehearsed countless times. As the cars began to move, Kate felt her heart rate increase slightly. Through the bulletproof windows, she could see the first clusters of people gathered along the route, waving flags and holding handmade signs. Even this early in the journey, the crowds were substantial. What would they encounter as they got closer to London? William reached over and gently squeezed Kate's hand, a small gesture that spoke volumes. They had supported each other through countless public appearances, but today felt different. The stakes were higher, the attention more intense, the historical significance more profound. They were not just attending an event, they were participating in the continuation of a 1,000-year-old tradition. George peered out the window, with wide eyes, watching the landscape change as they traveled from the relative quiet of Windsor toward the bustling heart of London. He had been to many royal events, but never one quite like this. His grandfather was about to become king. His father was already Prince of Wales, and someday this would all be his responsibility. The weight of that future was beginning to dawn on him, though he was still too young to fully comprehend its magnitude. Charlotte was enchanted by everything she saw. The crowds, the flags, the police escort. It was like a fairy tale come to life. She had been practicing her curtsy and her walking, determined to be perfect for the cameras that she knew would be watching her every move. Her dress rustled softly as she bounced slightly in her seat, unable to contain her excitement completely. Louis pressed his face against the window, fascinated by the police motorcycles and their flashing lights. His energy was infectious, and, despite the solemnity of the occasion, his innocent enthusiasm brought smiles to his parents' faces. They hoped his good mood would last through the long ceremony ahead. The first major crowd appeared as they entered the outskirts of London. Thousands of people lined the streets, many of whom had been waiting since dawn to catch a glimpse of the royal family. The cheering was audible even through the reinforced windows of the car, a wall of sound that grew stronger as they progressed deeper into the city. Kate waved gracefully, her training evident in every gesture. Years of public appearances had taught her exactly how to acknowledge the crowd while maintaining her dignity. Her wave was neither too enthusiastic nor too reserved, striking the perfect balance that royal protocol demanded. William did the same from his side of the car, his expression serious but warm. The security operation surrounding them was remarkable to witness. Snipers were visible on rooftops, their positions carefully chosen to provide maximum coverage of the route. Police officers lined the streets at regular intervals, their eyes constantly scanning the crowd for any signs of trouble. Above them, helicopters circled in complex patterns, providing aerial surveillance of the entire area. Television crews were positioned at strategic points along the route, their cameras capturing every moment for the millions of viewers around the world who were watching the procession live. The commentators provided running analysis of the family's expressions, clothing choices, and interactions, their voices filled with the excitement that only a royal occasion could generate. Social media exploded with real-time updates and photos from spectators along the route. Warrior. Coronation was trending worldwide, with millions of posts sharing images, videos, and reactions to the unfolding ceremony. The global reach of the event was unprecedented, with viewers tuning in from every continent to witness this historic moment. As they approached central London, the crowds became even more dense. People had traveled from across the United Kingdom and around the world to be present for this historic day. Many wore elaborate costumes, their faces painted with Union Jack designs. Others held homemade signs expressing their love and support for the royal family. The atmosphere was festive, celebratory, and deeply emotional. Kate noticed tears in the eyes of some spectators, people who were genuinely moved by the significance of what they were witnessing. The coronation represented stability, tradition, and continuity in an uncertain world. For many, the royal family provided a sense of permanence and connection to their nation's history that was deeply meaningful. The car's communication system crackled with updates from the advance team. Westminster Abbey was ready, the guests were seated, and everything was proceeding according to schedule. The timing was perfect. They would arrive at exactly the planned moment, allowing for the ceremony to begin precisely on time. William's thoughts turned to his father, who was probably experiencing his own mix of emotions as he prepared for the most important moment of his life. After decades as heir to the throne, Charles was finally about to be crowned king. The weight of expectation, tradition, and responsibility must be overwhelming, yet William knew his father was ready for this moment. As Westminster Abbey came into view, the crowds reached a crescendo of excitement. The ancient building, decorated with flowers and banners, stood majestically against the London sky. This was where kings and queens had been crowned for nearly 1,000 years, where history had been made generation after generation. Today, they would add their own chapter to that extraordinary story. The moment the royal car came to a stop outside Westminster Abbey, the world seemed to pause. Photographers positioned behind the barriers adjusted their lenses, television cameras zoomed in, and the crowd held its collective breath. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the first glimpse of the Wales family arriving at the coronation. Kate took a deep breath as her door was opened by a perfectly uniformed footman. The sound of the crowd was overwhelming, thousands of voices cheering, calling out names, expressing joy and excitement. She stepped out gracefully, her dress flowing perfectly despite the careful maneuvering required to exit the car with dignity. The fabric caught the morning light beautifully, and the crowd's reaction was immediate and thunderous. William emerged from the other side of the vehicle, his military uniform catching the sunlight and reflecting his medals and decorations. He moved with the confident bearing that had been instilled in him from childhood, acknowledging the crowd with subtle nods while maintaining the formal dignity the occasion demanded. His presence commanded attention, and the crowd responded with renewed cheering. George was the first child to emerge, and the crowd's reaction was particularly warm. As the future king, he held a special place in the public's affection, and his serious demeanor as he stood beside his parents impressed onlookers. He had been coached extensively on how to behave, and his natural poise was evident as he waited patiently for his siblings. Charlotte stepped out next, her dress pristine and her hat perfectly positioned. She looked around at the massive crowd, with wonder but remembered her training, offering a small wave that delighted the spectators. Her natural charm was evident even in such a formal setting, and photographers captured dozens of images of her sweet expression. Louis emerged last, his eyes wide with amazement at the spectacle surrounding him, the noise, the crowds, the grandeur of Westminster Abbey. It was a lot for a 6-year-old to process. He stayed close to his parents, occasionally looking up at them for reassurance, but his natural curiosity kept his eyes moving constantly, taking in every detail of this extraordinary scene. The family formed a perfect line as they began their approach to the Abbey entrance. Kate and William walked together, with the children positioned according to the careful choreography that had been rehearsed multiple times. Every step was calculated, every gesture deliberate, yet they managed to appear natural and relaxed despite the intense scrutiny. The Abbey's entrance was decorated with stunning floral arrangements that had taken days to install. Thousands of flowers in the royal colors created an archway that was both welcoming and magnificent. The ancient stones of the building provided a dramatic backdrop, their history evident in every weathered surface and carved detail. Security. Personnel moved discreetly around the family, their presence barely noticeable to the crowd but absolutely essential to the safety of the proceedings. They had been training for this day for months, coordinating with multiple agencies to ensure that every possible threat had been anticipated and prepared for. The Archbishop of Canterbury waited at the entrance, resplendent in his ceremonial robes. His expression was solemn yet welcoming as he prepared to greet the family who would play such crucial roles in the ceremony. Behind him, the Abbey's interior glowed with warm light, candles flickering and creating an atmosphere of sacred reverence. As they approached the entrance, Kate could see inside the Abbey for the first time. The sight was breathtaking. Hundreds of distinguished guests in their finest attire, military officers in dress uniforms, members of the nobility wearing ceremonial robes and jewels that hadn't been seen in public for years. The scene was like stepping back in time to an earlier era of royal pageantry. The world's media was capturing every second of their arrival from multiple angles. News outlets were providing live commentary in dozens of languages, with royal experts analyzing every detail of their appearance, body language, and interactions. The global audience was estimated to be in the hundreds of millions, all watching this historic moment unfold. William could feel the weight of history as they approached the ancient doorway. This was where his grandmother had been crowned decades earlier, where his father was about to take the throne, and where he himself would one day undergo the same sacred ceremony. The continuity of the monarchy was embodied in this building and this moment. The children maintained their composure beautifully, their months of preparation evident in their confident bearing. George walked with the dignity befitting a future king, while Charlotte and Louis stayed close to their parents but showed no signs of being overwhelmed by the magnitude of the occasion. Their presence added a touch of youth and hope to the ancient ceremony. Inside the Abbey, the congregation rose as word spread that the Wales family had arrived. The sound of hundreds of people standing simultaneously created a rustle that echoed through the vaulted spaces. Heads turned toward the entrance, and expressions of anticipation and respect were visible on faces throughout the massive interior. The processional music began to swell, performed by the Abbey's choir and orchestra. The sound was magnificent, filling every corner of the building and providing a majestic soundtrack for this historic arrival. The music had been specially chosen for its significance and beauty, creating an atmosphere that was both celebratory and reverent. Kate and William exchanged a brief glance as they prepared to enter the Abbey. This was it, the moment they would take their places in one of the most important ceremonies in British history. Everything they had prepared for, everything they had practiced, everything they had dreamed of, was about to unfold before the watching world. The family paused for just a moment at the threshold, allowing the photographers to capture this historic instant. Then, with dignity and grace, they stepped forward into Westminster Abbey, ready to play their part in crowning a new king and ushering in a new era for the British monarchy. Stepping into Westminster Abbey was like entering a living piece of history. The ancient walls seemed to vibrate with the weight of centuries, and Kate felt a profound sense of awe as she took her first steps down the nave. The Gothic architecture soared above them, the vaulted ceiling disappearing into shadows that had witnessed the coronations of kings and queens for nearly 1,000 years. The congregation was magnificent to behold. Row upon row of distinguished guests filled the abbey, each dressed in their finest ceremonial attire. Foreign royalty sat alongside heads of state, military leaders beside religious figures, all united in witnessing this historic moment. The rainbow of colors from various national costumes, military uniforms, and formal robes created a tapestry of international unity and respect. William could feel the eyes of hundreds of people following their progress down the aisle. Every step was deliberate and measured, their pace slow enough to maintain dignity while allowing the cameras to capture every moment. The processional music continued to swell around them, the choir's voices rising to the ancient rafters in harmonies that seemed to connect them directly to centuries of royal tradition. George walked with remarkable composure for his age, his small hand occasionally brushing against his father's uniform. As they proceeded down the aisle, he had been instructed to look straight ahead, but his eyes couldn't help but wander to the incredible sights surrounding him. The stained glass windows cast colorful patterns across the stone floors, and the flickering candlelight created an atmosphere that was both magical and deeply reverent. Charlotte maintained her perfect posture, remembering all the lessons about how a princess should walk and carry herself. Her dress rustled softly with each step, and she could hear whispered comments from the congregation about how beautiful she looked. The attention might have overwhelmed many children, but Charlotte seemed to thrive in the spotlight, her natural grace evident to everyone watching. Louis was doing his best to be good, his small face serious with concentration as he tried to remember all the instructions he had been given. Walk slowly, don't run, stay close to Mommy and Daddy, look forward, smile when appropriate but not too much. It was a lot for a 6-year-old mind to process, but he was managing admirably, his occasional curious glances around the abbey endearing him to the watching congregation. The abbey's interior had been transformed for the coronation while still maintaining its sacred character. Flowers in the royal colors adorned every surface, their fragrance mingling with the ancient scent of stone and wood. The lighting had been carefully arranged to illuminate the ceremony while respecting the building's historic atmosphere. Candles flickered in golden holders, their warm glow adding to the sense of reverence and celebration. As they approached their designated seats, Kate caught sight of King Charles III for the first time that day. He was already in position, wearing the ceremonial robes that would soon be replaced by even more magnificent garments for the actual crowning. His expression was serene yet focused, a man who had waited his entire life for this moment and was now ready to embrace his destiny as monarch. The seating arrangements had been planned with meticulous attention to protocol and diplomacy. Every placement had been considered and reconsidered, ensuring that relationships between nations, ranks within the nobility, and family connections were all properly respected. Kate and William took their seats in positions that reflected their status as future king and queen, close enough to participate fully in the ceremony while allowing clear sightlines for the cameras that would broadcast this moment to the world. The children were seated between their parents, ensuring they would be supported and guided throughout the long ceremony ahead. Special cushions had been provided to help them see over the heads of other guests, and quiet entertainment had been discreetly prepared in case their attention began to waver during the more lengthy portions of the service. Queen Camilla was positioned near the altar, her own ceremonial robes magnificent in their detail and historical significance. She would have her own moment of recognition during the ceremony, but for now she waited with the patience and dignity that her new role demanded. Her journey to this moment had been long and sometimes difficult, but she had earned her place through years of dedicated service and genuine affection for the man who was about to become king. The international guests were a testament to Britain's place in the world community. Presidents and prime ministers, princes and princesses, religious leaders and cultural figures, all had traveled to London to witness this historic moment. Their presence transformed the coronation from a purely British event into a global celebration of tradition continuity and hope for the future. The media coverage was unprecedented in its scope and technical sophistication. Cameras positioned throughout the abbey captured every angle, every expression, every significant moment. The broadcast was being translated into dozens of languages and transmitted to every corner of the globe. Social media platforms were alive, with real-time commentary, photographs, and reactions from viewers worldwide. The abbey's acoustic properties were perfect for the ceremony, carrying the choir's voices and the spoken words of the service to every corner of the building. The sound seemed to wrap around the congregation, creating an immersive experience that transported everyone present back through centuries of royal history. Each note, each word, each moment was crafted to create an atmosphere of sacred celebration. Kate felt a deep sense of privilege as she sat in this historic building, surrounded by centuries of tradition, and preparing to witness her father-in-law's transformation into king. The responsibility of her own future role weighed on her, but it was balanced by excitement and determination to serve with the same dignity and grace that had characterized the best of her predecessors. William's thoughts turned to his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, whose long reign had ended not so many months before. She would have been proud to see this moment, to witness the seamless continuation of the monarchy she had served so faithfully for so many decades. Her presence seemed to hover over the ceremony, a reminder of duty, service, and the enduring power of the crown to unite and inspire. The moment was approaching when the actual crowning would begin. The congregation settled into an expectant silence, broken only by the soft rustle of ceremonial robes and the distant sound of crowds cheering outside the abbey walls. History was about to be made, and every person present understood the privilege of witnessing this extraordinary moment in the life of the British nation. The moment had arrived. A profound silence settled over Westminster Abbey as the Archbishop of Canterbury raised St. Edward's crown high above King Charles III's head. Kate felt her breath catch in her throat as she witnessed this sacred moment that connected the present to over 1,000 years of royal tradition. The ancient crown, heavy with gold and precious stones, seemed to glow in the abbey's carefully arranged lighting. William watched his father with a mixture of pride and emotion that he struggled to contain. This was the man who had raised him, guided him, and prepared him for his own future role as monarch. Seeing Charles finally receive the recognition and authority he had been preparing for his entire life was deeply moving. The weight of the crown being placed on his father's head represented not just personal achievement, but the continuation of an institution that had weathered centuries of change and challenge. The children sat transfixed by the spectacle unfolding before them. George understood that he was watching his grandfather become king, but the full implications of what that meant for his own future were still beyond his young comprehension. Charlotte was mesmerized by the beauty of the ceremony, her eyes wide with wonder at the magnificent robes, sparkling jewels, and solemn pageantry. Louis had been remarkably well-behaved throughout the long service, occasionally leaning against his mother for comfort, but maintaining his focus on the extraordinary scene at the altar. The congregation held its breath as the crown was lowered onto Charles's head. The symbolism was profound. This simple act transformed a man into a monarch, investing him with the authority and responsibility that came with the throne. The silence in the abbey was so complete that the sound of fabric rustling and gentle breathing seemed amplified in the sacred space. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The Archbishop's voice rang out clear and strong through the ancient building. "God save the King!" The response from the congregation was immediate and thunderous. Hundreds of voices joined, together in the traditional cry that had echoed through these walls for generations. "God save the King!" they responded, their voices carrying centuries of loyalty, tradition, and hope for the future. Kate felt tears welling in her eyes as she joined her voice to the chorus. This was her father-in-law being crowned, but it was also a moment that would define her own future. William was now the heir to a reigning king, and she was the wife of the future monarch. The crown that had just been placed on Charles's head would one day rest on William's, and eventually, their son George would stand in this same position. The emotion in the abbey was palpable. Foreign dignitaries wiped tears from their eyes, moved by the historic significance of what they were witnessing. Military officers stood at attention, their medals catching the light as they honored their new commander-in-chief. Religious leaders from various faiths bowed their heads in respect for the sacred nature of the ceremony they had just observed. William felt compelled to stand, and as he rose, the entire congregation followed his lead. The sound of hundreds of people rising simultaneously filled the abbey, a rustling wave of movement that seemed to lift the very atmosphere of the building. He bowed deeply to his father, now King Charles III, in a gesture that acknowledged both their personal relationship and the formal hierarchy of the monarchy. The newly crowned king's eyes met those of his son across the abbey, and in that moment, 1,000 unspoken words passed between them. Pride, love, responsibility, hope, all were communicated in that single exchange of glances. Charles nodded slightly to William, a gesture that spoke of continuity, preparation, and confidence in the future of the monarchy. Queen Camilla's own moment had come earlier in the ceremony, but now she shared in the triumph of her husband's coronation. Her journey to this position had been long and sometimes difficult, but her dedication to Charles and to the role she would now play as queen consort was evident in her dignified bearing and emotional response to the moment. The abbey bells began to ring, their ancient bronze voices carrying the news of the coronation across London and beyond. The sound was picked up by church bells throughout the United Kingdom and across the Commonwealth, creating a chain of celebration that spanned continents. It was a sound that connected the present moment to centuries of tradition, announcing to the world that Britain had a new king. Outside the abbey, the crowds erupted in celebration. The cheering was so loud it could be heard even through the thick walls of the ancient building. People who had waited for hours in the London streets were finally able to express their joy and excitement at witnessing this historic moment. Flags waved, horns blew, and voices raised in songs of celebration that would continue long into the night. Kate looked at her children and saw their faces reflecting the wonder and importance of what they had just witnessed. This was a story they would tell their own children and grandchildren, a moment that would be remembered and studied for decades to come. They had been not just observers but participants in one of the most significant events in modern British history. The ceremony was drawing to a close, but the impact would last forever. King Charles III had been crowned, and a new chapter in the story of the British monarchy had begun. The crown sat upon his head with the authority of centuries, and the future stretched ahead filled with promise, challenge, and the continuing service that defined the royal family's commitment to their nation and people. As the final prayers were spoken, and the last notes of the ceremonial music faded into the ancient stones of Westminster Abbey, Kate and William knew that they had witnessed something truly extraordinary. The coronation was complete, the king was crowned, and history had been made in the most magnificent way possible. The world had indeed held its breath in awe and emotion, and the moment would live forever in the hearts and memories of all who witnessed it.